Good evening, everyone. I would like to invite or to welcome you to the leap year edition of our City Council work session. Meeting tonight with Design Review and Planning Commission. And so I will call the meeting to order. Before we approve the agenda, I just want to clarify one item. After we finish discussion item number 1, we will excuse the Planning Commission and Design Review Board. And we will go on to a second item that we added last night. Okay, any questions on that? So do I have approval of the agenda?
So moved as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So tonight's discussion is on the code rewrite joint work session with Planning Commission and Design Review. And Marcy, are you going to start us off?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I kept thinking this is going really fast. I'm leaping through there. Anyone have public comment for the meeting? If you're in the audience and would like to make public comment, raise your hand. Okay, Jeannie?
Hi there. Did you say your name?
Your name and mailing address, please.
P.O. Box 623,
Okay, thank you.
Tank Beach, of course.
Yes.
Well, I could be out being a cougar tonight, I guess, because it's leap year, but I chose to come here. Anyway, I wanted to tell you that I do believe that Cannon Beach has magic. And I would hope we can keep it magical with the affordable housing. I advocate for youth, middle age, seniors, all ethnic groups, just a nice diversity to keep our community really alive and well. And I know I wrote you all a letter, but I learned something new today that I thought is worth sharing. It's actually from a person who may have to leave if her landlord decides to make her rental a short-term rental. And we have a lot of short-term rentals. I'm not sure how many. And I love the one rental, the people that live across from me are rentals, but I'm the only permanent, I have the only house that's permanent now. In 1975, all 12 houses on West Washington Street were permanent. And now I'm the only one. And it's just, I like a community feel that we had then. And I know things change, but, and I really like the tourists, and I call them visitors or guests. And I'm kind of like a walking Chamber of Commerce in a way. I think some of you know how I do, people say, oh, whether it's Spanish or English, where would you suggest for a restaurant? So I say, what do you like to eat? And I give them a variety of nice places. But anyway, I heard today that in Denver, well, see, it's in Colorado. I'm not sure exactly where. And in Montana, they have something called Steve, what was it called? Rent cap of it's based on square footage somehow, that you can't charge any more than a certain amount, per square foot. And I don't know if that maybe could be something that we could look into, to help, because it sounds like one bedroom here is pretty much, I think it's about $1,200 at least, something like that, or maybe more than that. This person has a child. But anyway, you wouldn't want to lose her, but I better not tell you her name because I don't have permission to say that. But anyway, and I know some other people have waited like it's 3 years and finally found a small studio apartment, But and I like these wealthy people that have worked hard. I have one across the street from me, and I understand that they worked hard to get where they are, but surely there's got to be some way to get more ADUs, and a few apartments, even I remember Lisa talked about that, and I think you did too, Carrie, about there's, the RV park might have 2 or 3 places that maybe if we buy that from the city, that we could, do that, have a few apartments and then duplexes. What else? I think that's about all. Let's see. Well, I do want to say thank you to all of you though for all your energy and your commitment to Cannon Beach. I mean, wow. Eric was the volunteer firefighter, I think, of the year. I'm gonna get you some crunchy peanut butter, in fact. I heard you like that. Fred Meyer, next time I go.
Oh, okay, Jeannie, we'll wrap it up, please.
I think, let's see, yeah. Okay. Oh, I just wanted to say thanks to Watt Childress since we don't have neighbors much, in several streets. Well, at least we have, Watt Childress tries to get these community dinners. And that's really wonderful. And maybe help her that Andrew, it has things like karaoke, So, I mean, there are ways to see people, but I'm kind of old fashioned a little bit that way. That I like a neighbor occasionally, for a community. This is from 1970, by the way, what I have on right here.
Okay,
Be a little frugal to stay here. You don't want this one senior to leave. I'm gonna have to get a bigger refrigerator and have a renter or something.
thank you,
Very much for
thank you,
everything you all do.
thanks.
Sorry, I didn't have it all written out exactly, just.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience? That would be a tough act to follow. Okay, is there anyone online that would like to give public comment? If you would raise your hand, please. Okay, so we will close public comment and move to our discussion item. Martha?
All right, I'd like to give a presentation, slides just that summarize what was in your packet, but I just want to say thank you to Chet for being here and Tim for being here, and also for the great attendance from you. In the packet, I just want to let you know, the public know that the packet consists of all the survey results and together by page and including all of the comments, which were voluminous and very informative. We also summarized some of the key points of Alyssa's presentation so that you have those written down. She delivered them extemporaneously. And then I think that's the basic contents of your packet. I just want to give a short presentation to summarize those things. So, and also, the main purpose of this is to have Alyssa come on at 6:30. She'll be joining by Zoom so that you can continue to ask her any questions that have come up since you've read the survey results or you've had some time to think about all the testimony. And then she and I will discuss specific actions and decide on next steps. And that's where I'm hoping you will be able to weigh in on those too, participate in that conversation.
Great, thank you.
I guess I do have one question, Mayor, are we going to take public testimony after that again?
If we.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if you could go to the next slide, please, Robert. The housing survey was 281 responses. We held it open from January 18th to February 20th. And that's really a large amount for a community of this size. 80% of the respondents live in Cannon Beach, 68% own their homes, 36% rent, and 4% have some other arrangement. Some of which was revealed in the comments, and some of which might also be deduced from some of the testimony that we received, what an other arrangement tends to be. 78% of the respondents work, and 25% of respondents own a business in Cannon Beach. The average household size, kind of in line with national typical sizes. And some of the key questions that we asked, so you may have yourself noticed that we opened the survey with information. We asked for basic information from people so we could understand where they lived, how they got to work. how much income they tended to spend on their housing. And then toward the end of the survey, we went into a for perceptions about housing issues across communities or multiple choice. And they were very interesting. So in that more perceptions of when we asked people if Cannon Beach is living up to its policy, as you're familiar with this policy that's in the comprehensive plan, it has language about encouraging the development of housing which meets the needs of a variety of age and income groups as well as special needs. And 81% of respondents, in absolute number 243 people, responded they felt strongly that was not being provided. And then there was a question about if there was a lack of, if people felt there was a lack of affordable housing in Cannon Beach, which we had defined as housing that requires households to spend less. Affordable housing means you spend less than 30% of your income on housing. And 89% of people, a total absolute number of 243, said that they did not feel there was affordable housing. So those were two of the most strong opinions. Results. Cost and supply was cited as top reasons for a lack of housing options, especially a lack of rental housing. And then there were the top two factors that people cited that made it difficult to find housing in Cannon Beach were housing is too expensive. 85% of people said that, or there was a lack of housing for rent. 77% of people said that. And then we asked a multiple choice question for people to select, I think on question 14, it was select the things that you believe make it more difficult to find housing. And the three most popular answers to that question, popular is not really the right term, but in a survey, it's the term used. Not enough housing supply in general. Short-term rentals were perceived as a reason, and so were second homes perceived as a reason. So then I wanted to also provide some numbers that Alyssa she talked about when she was here. These are numbers that she's gotten from the city. The Cannon Beach housing composition, the total housing units are 1,888. And of those, 205 are licensed short-term rentals. That's about 10%. And 705 are primary residents. So about 40% of those units are primary residents. Do we want to talk about the survey results before I move on to actions at all? Do we want to have a conversation about them?
Anybody have anything they'd like to say? I do know, I took the survey. I thought it was a good survey. We also passed it out at the food pantry, and they were number one, very pleased to see that it was in two languages, and that somebody was asking them. And even people that work in Cannon Beach but live elsewhere, and they wanted to hand it back and say, and we said, no, we need your responses also. So I thought it was a really good instrument. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for mentioning that. I want to remind you all that you asked that there be a public engagement event created around housing, and you asked for a survey. Asked that there be a meeting where people could come and speak in public. And so we've done that. I think personally it was very important and informative. And I think that it leads us to some actions. And these are what I would suggest. And I have also, just for your information, run these by Alyssa. She supports these. I hope when she comes, we can talk more about how they would work. One is to revisit the public benefits provision, which you may remember from when Jeff Adams was here. He and UrbsWorks developed a approach to limiting the total floor area ratio that would be permitted. It would be a similar kind of approach that's being taken into the wetland overlay. But where an additional unit is planned, that FAR would increase, but only in that instance. So we've tested these forms on specific sites, and I would like to bring that idea back and test it out further. It would be one of our recommended actions. Another would be to enable middle housing that other Oregon cities are allowing, and also to mention that the middle housing such as duplexes, cottage clusters, and triplexes are not really a new thing. They're more of an old-fashioned thing. And in fact, Cannon Beach has some examples of these. Most cities do have historic examples of these multiple units in a single house-like structure. I think these could work on many sites maybe not many, but some sites in Cannon Beach. I'd like to explore how to enable more ADUs. There were some really interesting comments. And it seems to me that Cannon Beach could really make a lot more of ADUs than they do today, with the fact that people are interested in them, that you have a contractor who specializes in them. There are probably more people. There's probably a small cottage industry to be created around that. I'd like to recommend that we hold a multi-day on-site design workshop to test middle housing prototypes on some prototypical Cannon Beach sites or lots and troubleshoot the design compatibility and affordability issues, and have this be a kind of continuation of the public engagement process. And Alyssa Gertler is interested in supporting this as a county project as well. We would use the design workshop testing to inform code amendments, like specifically FAR adjustments, or how ADUs might be made more. It's possible that you could have an ADU design that you're happy with that doesn't have to go through design review because it's been tested, and somebody might have that option to use. There might also be setback changes or adjustments that we make much more regular or administratively approved. So these would be specific metrics that we would build into your zoning code. They would come out of the design workshop. There's also, it was suggested by several local people are much more knowledgeable about these sites than I am, but there are sites where affordable housing projects could be explored, could be built. And we would like to include that and understand any zoning impediments that we could help resolve during the code rewrite. And most important, I think, is that we have a smaller group we could work with on these issues over time. It's a little unwieldy to work on some of these issues within the whole group. And so might be a model a bit like the wetland overlay. And there are other actions that we could pursue, you could pursue with the Clatsop County. And this is again, an advantage of having Alyssa interested and involved. And she brings some county support. That's my list. I think that is also the end of my presentation. There's nothing else after this, right? Okay. The end.
So could we keep the recommendations up on the screen and have, like, we have about a 10-minute lapse before she's ready, right, to present. So maybe we could discuss some of these follow-up actions. And when you talk about a smaller group, you're referring to what we are calling focus groups. Okay. So we've had a wetlands focus group, a tree focused group. Those individuals have worked very hard to achieve some great results. And so it seems to be a good model if we have willing volunteers.
May I ask a question about that? The group has members beyond the Joint Commission members, right? And I think that's also something that would be helpful here, would be to have people outside of this group. Okay.
Right, yeah. So the tree focus group has Parks and Community Services members on it. Citizens. And what I would really like in a housing focus group is to get someone that could tell us their story and share about how the difficulties they have gone through to find housing in Cannon Beach. And we've had people testify to that. So hopefully we can get some volunteers. Yeah.
I wonder if it's one focus group or if it's multiple. So housing is such a complex issue that I wonder if there's one group that is maybe looking specifically at zoning code and can help really try to hone in on that. Maybe there's someone else who's looking more at the policy pieces. For instance, do we think about that short-term rental tax or, some of these bigger questions that maybe take a different kind of focus than thinking about how do we change the zoning code? And maybe just it allows the work to be pinpointed. I don't know whether that creates a communication issue, but I can imagine a multi-group approach. And maybe as you're talking about individual projects, that may be very different than talking about what the code's going to look like if someone's exploring how do we actually make a project happen in Cannon Beach.
I think that's really a good idea.
I agree. I think it would be good if there were some regular all group discussions, because these things do all overlap and influence each other. And if our goal is to really track progress, and we would want to know how these things could make a change together as well.
I think my question on your points about enabling duplexes, triplexes, cottage clusters, and ADUs would be, does there need to be not only a change to the zoning code to allow those, but also a policy change that makes people want to put them in to start with? So it seems like one of our issues is not having citizens who want to do that on their property. So does there need to be a concerted action where we're talking about policies to maybe incentivize doing that as well as making it a cleaner process through the code?
So some incentives that cities are looking at are, say, pre-approved ADU plans. That can be an incentive, or a bank financing program. The local banks have stepped up in some communities to offer loans so that people can do these, and also just in the federal sense, home mortgage now is allowed to be, I think you can lower your down payment if you have an ADU. I don't know if you have to have one built or if it's one that you will build, but it can help. I mean, so in some ways, what I see in a lot of communities is that if the city decides to act kind of as a clearinghouse of information and pull a lot of existing programs together and make those more available and more known, that can really help. It's not necessarily inventing something new.
Okay.
I had a question for Marcy. How common is it in Oregon cities to see ADUs go through something like design review?
I'm a little reluctant to bring this up, but it's actually not permitted. State law does not allow.
I brought that up before. It certainly doesn't for cities of 10,000 or more, I think
I think it is. So my understanding is it applies to all cities.
Okay.
And I think we would
There's
want
an
to
answer,
address
yeah.
that eventually here. Also, you cannot require an ADU to require a parking space. So there's a couple of things that the state does not allow cities to do around ADUs. Those are two of them.
Marcy?
Subject them to design review or require parking space.
Sure, that applies to, I thought it only applied to cities of 2,500 or more per the new, the Oregon legislature dropped down from 10,000 to 2,500 for a lot of the rulings. I don't know if it applies to smaller municipalities.
Maybe say it another way. It wouldn't be considered best practice.
You could be right, Councillor Kerr, and we would want to look at that for sure.
It isn't a best practice, though.
I do think there are ways to allow ADUs that don't require them to go through design review. And now I know design review here works a certain way. We had someone testify that they know how to work with the design review board to get an ADU approved, and that was encouraging to hear. But I do think that design review generally can be a disincentive to middle housing of any kind, including mixed use.
Does anyone know the history of why we have ADU?
I was on the
Design
planning
review.
commission when we,
Oh, it's your fault.
I mean, it was just a tool that was
Okay.
available.
Okay,
And it was something that was, people were asking about it and would,
because there was issues with?
well, it was a square footage issue
Oh, okay.
for the
Gotcha.
addition.
Got
So we set the limit at 650
Okay,
and said, you can do this. Is there something more specific that
and then how did it get to design review approval?
that I'm not sure about?
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
Could it be because people might have been just throwing up things that were not compatible with the neighborhoods, in order just to, have a structure there that they could rent out?
I don't know.
That would be one rationale for doing it.
Right.
Well, have
What is the-
have ADUs always been prohibited from vacation rentals?
But I don't think that's.
Because if they were always, then that would be,
That was my understanding when we
Yeah.
went through and it created the unintended consequence of sort of incentivizing a homeowner to rent their primary home out as the vacation. And so that's something I think we've talked about addressing
yeah.
as a council to
Right.
sort of clean that up.
So what is the scope of design review related to ADUs? I know it's parking. I'm assuming it's that it fits within the square footage. Anybody have?
That would be administrative, I think, right? I mean,
View.
Yes, yeah, I would say the DRB is asked about view obstruction. Or,
Because you're going through one of those right now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
which wouldn't apply to any other residential structure except ocean front.
Would apply to a duplex.
Yeah, duplex.
Sorry, yes,
into
yeah.
duplex.
That was another thing I didn't understand is why we have design review for duplexes. I was real confused about that when we had the forest, when now we're looking at the forest lawn duplexes, and I thought, I don't understand why you have design review for that.
Because it's commercial property.
What's that?
It becomes a commercial property.
Duplex stuff? No, I don't think so. I don't see why it would.
I think it's
It's a
acting
business.
as a commercial property while not being a commercial property. Because the intent is that one would be rented or both would be rented.
Well, Steve is shaking his head, so
So residentially, it's thought of property, just because you can rent it commercially to someone else doesn't make it commercial. It's considered 1 and 2 family homes are considered residential by our zoning ordinance and building code.
But could that be why it's under DRB review because of the?
I have no idea. I would just say I can't explain why it's that way. I'm just guessing that it was when it was allowed, that the thought process was maybe the aesthetics and things like that and character of fitting in with the rest of the neighborhood is what I can,
yeah,
would be my thought.
That's what I would think.
I think that's what it was.
Well, the fact remains, I think we've approved 9 in 3 years. We just approved 1. So there's some gating factor here.
Well, how many have been turned down?
right,
None.
But it's an arduous, a continuance, which the most recent one had because the neighbor was complaining perhaps that the view would be better if it was moved 5 feet over or something. It allows an uncertain building frame, building time frame, which is really difficult in this. If you can't tell your contractor when you're gonna start, kind of go to the,
I would guess that very few people did not build an ADU because they had to go through design review. I doubt if that connection is very strong. I think that most people don't build ADUs because they don't want them on their property. Because they don't want someone living on their property, especially if they have a 50 by 100 square foot lot. They don't want another structure on there with people living there. I mean, and you know, if it was incentivized, maybe they would, but I doubt very much that design review, you know, the review of design review board has been really instrumental in stopping people. I just don't, it doesn't make sense to me.
Wouldn't that appeal have happened? We'd have to honor the appeal anyway, with or without design review board. A neighbor appealed because of loss of.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, good
There's
point.
another barrier, and that's a physical one. When you have a house in the front of the property, you may have plenty of room to build an ADU in your backyard, but it becomes, you know, an engineering gymnastics feat to build a building in the backyard. You can't get excavation equipment and other things back there. So that's something that I believe is a barrier to
Oh, yeah. I didn't
more
think about that.
ADUs.
Another issue they use is at least the ones we've seen, seems to be you always put the living quarters above a double garage. Or else a nearly double garage. And that's kind of standard. So then you wind up getting into your neighbor's view. Where if they were single story, that wouldn't have to happen. You don't have to have
That's true, but I think that goes back to my point that I just made, is that when you have that space above a garage, that's literally the only place you can put it.
Yeah. If you only have if you already have a garage.
Yeah.
Maybe we could just talk about the public benefits provision and the ADUs together. So that idea was, as I mentioned earlier, making the by right FAR smaller than it is today. And allowing someone, if they were going to build an ADU, to recapture that. And this would probably be much more meaningful in a new construction situation. But it is possible, that could be an incentive, that new housing gets built as 2 units more frequently than just a single dwelling.
I'm not understanding though, Marcy. Do you mean, okay, if you have the main structure and they have an FAR limit on them. And if they build an ADU as well, the main structure gets to be bigger?
No, both, they get a collective ADU increase. Or, I'm sorry, FAR increase.
So they get the increase for the FAR and an increase in the amount of FAR for the main structure.
Yes, allowed for the primary structure too.
And what kind of restrictions can be placed on that in that kind of situation? Obviously, we want
What kind of restrictions could be placed on FAR?
to know when they receive that benefit of the added FAR, what kind of restrictions? I mean, and later they just blow out the wall and it becomes one big house.
How do you ensure that it's affordable housing? I think that's also one that we were interested in.
And that would be the role of an ongoing affordable housing
Group.
or that would be actually become a job of the city.
Yeah, and it's hard to have
Some kind of-
left standing on a standard lot if you blew out the amount of FAR and the amount of, and plus allowed the ADU. I mean, that's on a small lot, that's a
I'm
lot
not
of coverage.
explaining this very well, and I wish I had the diagram.
Programs that we did. So in the wetland, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, you're talking about reducing the by right FAR down, so right now it's 0.6 for R2, dropping it down to 0.5, and then allowing them to recapture that additional 0.1.
Only if they have an
If they're
additional
building,
dwelling. Yes. I don't recall if those are the exact reductions, but it's something like that.
Like that.
And we reduced the FAR for the wetland overlay. So if you are forced to, so you can find nowhere else on your site to build that's not in the buffer or in the wetland, your footprint and your FAR are limited.
And a lot of the concerns I've heard over the years,
Coming here is that,
it has been
a year,
it has been more than a year, and
the FAR is a big issue. I mean, like, people are taking advantage of every square foot, cubic foot of FAR that they have. And for a single dwelling often,
that's often not
full-time.
lived in.
So what kind of limits would you place on the FAR for the ADU?
I would want to, again, bring this public benefits provision back. We did a lot of math. We looked at the different kinds of lot sizes and the different rewards that you would get for doing things. We pinpointed some affordability provisions that we'd want to ensure that unit were giving in order to receive.
So it's,
I didn't come prepared to talk about it, but if there's interest, I think we should pursue it further.
To jog my memory, Marcy, I believe there were a series of floor plans that were part of that. Is that correct?
yes,
So it would seem to me that you could get the biggest benefit to attach the ADU to your home rather than a detached ADU.
But I don't think we limited it that way. If
No,
somebody gets-
I agree with what you're saying. That's just the way my mind thinks, is to try and maximize, the square footage.
Not two side yards.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you're just trying to fit everything in a setback.
It's hard to see how with a 5,000 square foot lot, 0.6, that's 3,000 square feet, including an ADU. That's a lot. I mean, I can't see that as a gating factor.
you can't see what is it gaining.
I can't see the FAR as a limiting factor to building ADUs.
Right. You're saying.
There,
it would be easy
at
to
that,
build an
at that
ADU inside the-
R2 zone.
Yes,
That was the concept.
if I'm understanding what you're saying, the FAR that's given in the R2 zone is quite large.
Right,
Right.
it's 0.6, yeah.
Mike, did you have a comment?
I wasn't sure if it was 0.6 or.
No, it's
0.6,
So-
up to 5,000 or 5,500, I think.
That's all. I wasn't certain of the number.
I remember studying that just 2 years ago.
Any other discussions before we invite our other guest? Is she here? You said she'd be here by 6:30.
She's there.
Is she
I
here?
have- Oh, she.
And Robert, you're kind of watching if somebody on Zoom has a hand up. For me, are you doing that?
And she is with us.
Good evening.
Hi, Alyssa.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
We were just talking about the list of recommended follow-up actions and on ADUs.
How to enable more ADUs.
Yes, I have heard the last few minutes of the discussion.
Do you have any words of wisdom for us?
My words of wisdom are that I think Marcy is on the right track. And that it definitely is a conversation worth exploring further.
Would it be helpful if I found the slides where we actually talked about and I got them to Robert and we could look at them?
Yeah.
I'm just looking.
now.
You're gonna say something, so
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
Melissa, this is Chet. I was just gonna ask if you have best practices for assuring affordability in those ADUs. Perhaps before you joined, we heard a comment that some homeowners would move into their ADU and then short-term rent the main house, even if short-term rentals were excluded in the ADU. So just wondering if you have thoughts on ways to keep the rent of those ADUs affordable and long-term.
That is an interesting question in terms of what mechanism you would use to assure the ADUs remained affordable. You know, financing the construction of an ADU is an interesting question. And so in terms of would there be an appetite for putting a restriction on the property deed, it might be one way to look at that. But that could also add complications rather than remove barriers. I think, you know, there's something to be said in terms of this public benefits provision that Marcy kind of outlined around the FAR, being similar to basically having sort of a performance-based framework in terms of if you do this, then you get that. And so it may be similar that, you know, you would want to codify in some way an occupancy requirement or a performance bonus or benefit for a certain way that the property would perform, but that would require a little bit more research to figure out which were the right tools that would yield the outcomes you want without creating more complications to accomplishing it.
Really great. Thank you.
Can I ask you, why do you think having a deed restriction would cause problems?
I don't necessarily know that it would. I know that it might be a deterrent for those who would look at potential resale of a property, depending on how you would be financing both the construction financing and or the permanent mortgage financing that different financial institutions might feel differently about having restrictions on the deeds relative to the value, use, and resale of the property. But I think that is a tool that actually has been used in terms of
Any way to plug this in?
longer term affordability is putting a restriction on a deed so that no matter what the ownership is or what the financing model is, that the deed has some tool to preserve the underlying affordability.
Yeah, I saw some stuff, Eugene put out a thing in 2018 that was all about affordability, and they did a full study. And there's a lot of information in there about ADUs and incentivizing duplexes, triplexes, ADUs, all sorts of stuff like that. And there was one mention, I was trying to look for it just now, but there was one mention of deed restrictions. And I was wondering, so if that disincentivizes somebody to go forward with it, then in essence, that person, that entity, whoever was doing it, had no intention of it being affordable in the first place.
Right.
But it was just to jump through.
Yeah.
Essentially. And if there's a deed restriction, it kind of stops that hoop getting jumped through just for no reason for it to become whatever it is that they intended on building in the first place.
Well, if we could create the same outcome by just making it unpermissible to rent the primary residence and
the entire
ADU as a short-term rental.
I personally like that idea.
But it doesn't address the affordability.
No, it doesn't.
Right, it doesn't.
But I mean, we need market rate rentals too.
Yeah, we have more than one issue.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think it's going to be difficult to get at affordable housing with public sector volunteerism. It's going to require some city backing and so on. Create supply, as Gary just mentioned, with ADUs, and that's a good thing. But it's probably hard to get people enlisted in the affordable business as private citizens.
Yeah, the terms would get so confused because I don't never know if you're talking about affordable in like the government definition of affordable,
right?
Workforce. I mean, because it seems to me that what we really lack is workforce housing.
I totally agree with that. I'm not particularly fond of the idea of affordable housing and it be workforce housing.
Frankly, if you're renting a smaller square footage unit, right, most of the rents in your market are just on a per square foot basis. So a large square foot property would rent for more than a smaller square foot property. So I'm not sure who it was who mentioned just the idea of creating additional supply of smaller units without any public subsidy to make it, capital A affordable, just regular market rate housing. Something that is 600 square feet instead of 2,600 square feet will naturally command a lower rent. And so there is benefit to sort of just building smaller units, even if they have zero subsidy and are just on the market, because A, you've created additional supply, and B, the market will take care of what the appropriate rent is, right? You're not going to have 9 people living in an ADU, probably, like we've heard of in some of the single family houses. So there is a lot of benefit just to building more housing with a smaller footprint, just so that there's more choices in your community.
My sense from last time when we heard the testimony was that there were really 2 groups of people, because there were families. There were a number of people who really talked about how difficult it was to raise a family here. But then there were also a lot of people who were looking for the single unit spaces. So it seems like we do have to think about diversity of housing, right? Because this isn't just about one problem. We have a lot of different people. Some want to rent and some want to own. Again, you need diversity of types of housing available for everyone.
Yeah.
Our fire chief had a very eloquent post on that. He's been trying for a long time to get a family. Is it a family of 4 for chief?
So, yeah.
And, it's 4,000 a month or 5,000 a month.
And at one point he did live here, right?
Right.
Rented here.
And he would get an additional housing stipend if he did live here. So.
Well, it looks like you found your slide.
I did.
Okay.
I can show you how we.
Good time to do this?
I think so.
Okay.
Let me just go through the 5,000 square foot lot example first.
Because I think we're talking about smaller units. So what we modeled here was development that's allowed today. The lot size is in green.
The existing setbacks are in that kind of transparent shape.
And then the current
FAR, as we calculated it, just sort of arbitrarily placed it on the site, is a total of 3,000 square feet. The reduction that was proposed by Jeff at that time, by us working with Jeff, was down to a total of 2,500 square feet instead. And so you can see there's a
dark line shape in the back of that building, white building, that equals the subtracted
FAR. And then in exchange for public benefit, and then in this case, the public benefit was an additional unit, you would get that back plus a little bit, plus 600 square feet. And the question that Councilor Kerr was asking about, would that additional be given to the ADU or the primary dwelling? That wasn't decided on. It was, that's open for discussion. These were just
to begin to talk about this idea of reducing and then giving back FAR.
Plus a bonus in exchange for public benefits. And as I mentioned, the public benefits were also, again, for discussion, but affordable housing was one of the main ones that was hoped for. Then we did a similar exercise for the 10,000 square foot lot, just to show, it's very similar exercise, but the current FAR would be 5,000 square feet.
The reduction would be to 3,500 square feet.
And then with a bonus, would give them 4,100 square feet total. So I don't know what that tells us, but there's the pictures and
the math that went into it. And
I think it's worth pursuing if people are interested.
Marcia, can I ask a question? Would this apply to only newly developed lots, or would it apply to remodels, renovations? Are there gonna be loopholes if a home is already on there with the current FAR and someone purchases that, scrapes the home? Are they then subject to the new FAR requirements and then thus have an incentive to build an ADU, or do they get grandfathered in if
Yeah,
they bought
I
a
think
foundation that already contains that footprint?
The idea, I think, is if you build new, it would apply. If you scraped it and you built new, this would, your FAR would be reduced. You could not build to the old FAR.
And if you kept one wall standing and called it a remodel? Is there a loophole there? I'm trying to think of what our homeowner
thing, and
We would want to look at the cities. There must be some standard right now for what is called a pre-existing or, I mean, that must apply to some non-conforming structures. What is it that constitutes pre-existing structure that can be considered or allowed to exist non-conforming? So we'd probably want to look at those.
Thanks.
So usually non-conforming structures in this town are over setbacks. And so when the homeowner comes in for a remodel, they automatically need to apply for a setback reduction for the remodel. And in my experience, the more successful applications have been when a homeowner makes the addition conform to all of the current setbacks, but then would be given, the ability to leave part that existing home that might have been non-conforming. Does that help answer what you're?
So they can violate the setback in one area as long as they meet the.
If the planning commission approves it. But while I was on the planning commission, those types of applications seemed to have merit. They were, saving an existing home. They were remodeling it in a way that at least was appealing.
I want to just frame these recommendations within the larger code rewrite project, because that comes up often is how does all this fit into the larger code rewrite? As you remember, so just to remind us, we started out with this larger rewrite process, which was to reorganize the code, make it easier to do these kinds of policy fixes, but also small metrical dimensional changes that are very have to be done very carefully. And then we were going to look at wetlands, trees, housing, and parking. And I believe we're close to getting the wetland checked off. And so parking and housing is where we agreed that this public event was going to be about housing, and then the next one would be about parking. They're very interrelated. And we're entering this phase of the code rewrite where we're supposed to be identifying those amendments that we want. It's like our giant wish list of the amendments that we think we want to pursue. And knowing that we can't accomplish all of them, then we prioritize them and undertake those by the end of the project. So what we have here is the beginning, I think, list of amendments that we could look at for housing only. These would be my priorities, but I want them to be added to by the group. I'm sorry, this would be my wish list. And we probably want to look at the parking wish list too. And then we probably need to prioritize those in order to understand which amendments we can achieve. That was the logic of the larger code rewrite project, but we have changed our course a few times and we could do that again. We could address parking. Oh, I'm sorry, we could address housing first and then move on to parking second.
Well, I think parking is one to not be an impediment to something like this example. But there's also things we need to address with commercial parking, business required parking. So I think those are the two areas that we really need to look at. I don't think it's a major thing, but one, parking requirements for multifamily and then the commercial.
Well, I mean, I know you've seen what happened in Portland when they did away with required parking for apartment buildings and a lot of apartment buildings now going up in Portland don't have the same parking requirements they used to have. Everyone's parking on the streets all the way up to the corner, so you can barely turn a corner because you can't see the traffic coming on busy streets the other way. And I think I think they have to be looked at together.
I agree, they have to be looked at together. Maybe we should talk about like how to get the parking ramped up really fast so that we can look at them together. I just want to mention that as Portland resident, my perspective on what happened after the parking requirement was eliminated was that we got a lot more housing. We got housing in places that we hadn't gotten housing before. We got projects that were smaller and they were suddenly made much more feasible by having no parking requirements.
See, what I see in Southeast Portland, where my daughter lives, are quite large apartment complexes going up all over in the Selwood area, Westmoreland area, and no parking requirements. So you can drive around for perhaps a half an hour every night trying to find a parking space. And again, they're just parked shoulder to shoulder, all the way down both sides of each street. So you can't even, two cars cannot pass each other. So it isn't really all that successful as far as livability as for people who are using a car. If you're riding a bike or walking, then it works out just fine.
Same thing is true in Northeast.
So it doesn't seem very successful to me as far as a whole overall picture. True, there is more housing, but there's nowhere to park your car.
But I do think in the overall picture where, to just turn back to this survey results and the number of people that are living beyond their means and they're paying more than they should be for housing.
Yeah.
And we have a crisis in housing. It's quite clear. And Beach has its own flavor of the housing crisis, but it's a housing crisis. And I think many of the results of the survey spell that out loud and clear.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Alyssa put it well last time that we have affordable housing for cars, but not for people. There has to be an attempt to find a balance. A lot of people don't want to have a car. They would like to be able to live in they would like to be able to give up their car and be able to walk. And unless you get housing and commercial and employment kind of much more close in proximity, you won't be able to have that environment.
Right. And that's true in a city too. That works very well in a city, but in a town like this, where you, for example, if you want to go to the drugstore, you have to get in a car or a vehicle to go up to Seaside to go to a pharmacy. So it's not quite the same thing as the situation in a city where you can get around without a car.
It also has not reduced the cost of an apartment in Portland. Apartments are still outrageous.
The cost of housing is because housing is extremely limited. It's extremely expensive, but a lot of what we're talking about, not requiring parking for every apartment building, has made more affordable housing providers able to provide projects that were never feasible before. So that's another thing that we're seeing is affordable housing project providers who couldn't do a project before because they provide a parking space for every unit are suddenly able to provide more housing.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. It's also, they're both true.
Yes.
I mean,
It's a very careful planning exercise that we're engaged in.
it's difficult, but
Do you see something similar on the ADU example with incentivizing duplexes? But just different formulas?
Yes, I think the same best practices apply. You don't want to require parking. You don't want to require design review. You want to enable clear and objective standards that are very well crafted through a process much like this, So you know exactly what you're going to get ahead of time, but you don't require every project to get a case-by-case approval.
I guess my question is really about the FAR reduction and give back and a greater give back for duplex or a larger space.
That's an interesting idea. If I could see that working on certain sites in certain types of sites, or maybe.
Yeah, I guess we're looking at the 10,000 foot one there, so it's kind of easier to imagine that one.
Right, yes, correct. It is easier.
I see that Clay has his hand up.
Oh, Clay, did you want to say something?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Great.
go ahead.
Marcy, are we at the point in our conversation where we might consider mapping at the same time? It seems like some of what we're talking about might be addressed through districts that were better equipped to handle more cars parked than other areas.
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yes, that's a yes.
Okay.
And that would be something we would want to look at during this multi-day design
Workshop?
we would look at specific areas. We'd look at prototypical areas, like if you have an area that has this many, this kind of a grid and potential for on-street parking, and it has this many trees, canopy, or we have larger sites in some areas. Those are all different kinds of patterns where different approaches would work. We'd want to make sure we explored each one individually.
Sure.
Plus, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
By something that Alyssa will probably say
Is that the city is going to be,
contributing to the county's land suitability analysis, and this would.
and I think aid that process.
Kind of a follow-up question, and this one is for you, Alyssa. In Portland and the metro area, we saw a lot of new affordable housing added with either city and or county tax exemptions for 5 years, 10 years. Have you seen much of that in Clatsop County? And if you have, are you feeling like it's effective?
That's a great question. And definitely I would consider tax abatement as a useful tool to promote affordability. I actually haven't seen it deployed anywhere in the cities of Clatsop County or in the county itself, but I've heard multiple cities having the consideration of that very tool. And so I do think that that's something that makes a lot of sense in terms of being able to promote long-term affordability and also being able to make projects feasible that would not otherwise be feasible but for the tax abatement. So I think that's definitely worth a further consideration.
I think Michelle mentioned at our last DRB meeting that the governor's housing package has a tax abatement for ADUs and maybe duplexes. I've not actually seen that, but maybe some of you have.
This is something that a policy
Focus group could look at.
at the same time that a zoning code group is looking at.
Is that tied to providing long-term housing?
Yes.
Okay.
It is on the deed. They record that on the deed and with the city. And the city has an annual program that checks up to make sure that the rents that meet the affordability requirements are met. And the reporting is also met for the specific unit or units.
And on the parking issue, it may push us into a position where we need to look at permit resident parking, like many communities have to do.
Well, I also see that it's a matter of scale here. We're not gonna have huge apartment complexes,
Right.
10plexes where, all of those units have no parking. It's gonna be 1, 2, 3 units. And that'll be the extent of it. And I really don't see us eliminating parking for the entire project if it were a new one, but maybe reducing it.
Right. Yeah. Didn't we reduce the parking for CLOC?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did.
But,
That was,
the way that the parking has been used by cities, eliminating parking mandates doesn't mean that a developer or a builder or homeowner who wants to build an ADU can't provide parking. It just means that they're not being required by the city to provide it. They'll decide what they need.
I was just gonna mention this, the Skylark was, that it was an allowance to reduce it. It wasn't that they're just permitted to have less. And I think the discussion we're having here is more of not requiring it in the first place, so not having to have them go through the process of getting that reduction in the parking. So things like ADUs can not be required to have that. So for a single family dwelling with an ADU only requiring the two parking spaces, or even maybe only requiring the one parking space off street. In that, rather than having to ask for the variance of, in order to provide it, I need to reduce my parking sort of situation. It eliminates that barrier of the additional steps of doing that.
So Marcy, your all-day workshops, would those happen before the focus groups were formed? There'd be.
I think it would be helpful to have a focus group formed for the housing, maybe not the policy yet, the policy might lag a bit. But if we could get a focus group formed on to help us with the zoning, we could use that group to identify which sites, which kind of neighborhood contexts and patterns we would want to look at. And we would probably propose to that group for their review and support the format of the workshop.
Okay.
Marcy, and this may be a question for Alyssa as well. What I have not seen yet is a way to determine what the true need is for housing in our community. And it's a loaded question because so many people work in different communities. And if you provide housing anywhere in Clatsop County, somebody's going to rent it. They may not work in Cannon Beach, but I haven't seen anything that says we need X amount of units and how to determine that number.
I can respond to that if you would like.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So most of you are familiar with that 2019 housing study that was completed by Clatsop County and did look at that very question in terms of needed housing units. And at that time, whatever that was 5 years ago, the number that was put out there was that 1,500 housing units are needed in all of Clatsop County to meet current population and employment. And what was called out specifically in that report is this is especially acute in the South County towns such as Cannon Beach, where the preponderance of second homes is larger than in other parts of the county. So you could extrapolate that and, you could just divide it by 5 cities and say that each city needs 300 housing units in the next few years, or you could, allocate it by population and employment as you're describing. But I think, it's not a stretch to say that probably each city needs, 200 to 300 housing units over the next few years to just keep up with the current need, let alone the proposed need. And the study that we've just started will update that amount and will be more city specific. So we'll be able to refine that over the next year to get a more clear number that's more specific to Cannon Beach and the other cities. But if you start with that 1,500 number, that's a good starting point to get a scope and scale of what the need is.
Thank you so much, Alyssa.
Alyssa, that's interesting though. You say divide by 5, but our city has 12 to 1,400 people in it. So when you say dividing that amount by 5 and adding it onto our population, it's a much huger percentage of our population than it would be for a city like Astoria, for example. So I'm not understanding that dividing by 5 as if all the cities are the same.
That was just a simple example. I think you're right that you would want to, do some kind of proportional allocation based on both population and employment. And so even if believe, of course, that the cities with larger populations such as Astoria and Warrenton would be the places where there is additional demand greater than the populations of the smaller cities. To your point that some of you have been making is it's not just the people who are the residents of Cannon Beach, but also those who might be employees and work in Cannon Beach that need to find a place to live somewhere in the county, whether it's in Cannon Beach or nearby. So even if you looked at it proportionally, you know, let's just say that Cannon Beach needs 50 more of those 1,500 housing units. That's not a small amount. I don't believe you guys have produced 50 housing units in 1 year in a long time. And so it's, again, a proportional allocation does probably make more sense. But again, it was just an idea of sort of the scale of the countywide need.
I'm assuming in the county, we provide fewer workforce housing units than any community in the county.
Yeah.
Cannon Beach has the highest percentage of people who commute to work from another place other than living in Cannon Beach. So more people who work in Cannon Beach live somewhere else than in any of the other cities in Clatsop County.
Right. And we also have the highest number of empty, vacant second homes. Well, I think it was 40% of the homes here are occupied by residents.
Correct.
So.
At the last meeting, we talked a lot about the second homes and there was just not much. Maybe it was,
You know, reality or appetite, but
there's not much we can do about that. I don't think. That's
probably a fact.
there's probably much more to be gained in trying to get housing by leaving the second homes alone and getting the new housing in on other lots in other ways. Did I understand that right? It just seemed that the general reaction.
I'd love to tell you otherwise, but no, I believe that's a very accurate assessment. Short of forcing a second homeowner to rent their home, I don't understand how to turn those types of dwellings into long-term rentals.
We talked, there was an idea put forward about, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but a carve-out unit or something in a second home. I posed this idea that if there could be some program where artists are allowed to occupy a second home for some, you know, as in residence program, there might be some way of housing certain numbers of people. There might be some benefit to a second home owner for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, participating in the art culture of Cannon Beach, which is, you know, a big part of its identity. So I'm not saying we should just leave the issue all alone. I just think some of the most fruitful or the low-hanging fruit, you know, that we're going to see is not going to come from trying to figure out how to get second homes to house people.
I completely agree.
Yeah, generally.
No, that's true.
Want to use their home,
Yeah.
even if it's, twice a year.
You don't want it depreciated by somebody living in it
But
and, you know,
tax abatement
a stranger. Yeah, they don't want it.
tax abatement
They don't need the money.
could be an incentive for some.
I don't think for very many.
I have a question. This is Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
I was talking, I think I brought it up last time about, we're just talking about this right now, the empty home tax that was approved by San Francisco, November 8th, 2022, and became effective January 1st, 2024. Generally imposing a tax, keeping certain residential units vacant for more than 182 days on the calendar year. I'm wondering if that's a possibility to actually end up, I don't know how these things works, but using that kind of funding to fund affordable housing. Like if you do tax somebody that is not using their home and it's just a strain on the city, if there's a way around that. I know you was talking about how they haven't seen it done actually successfully yet, but I'm just wondering, but she said that Cannon Beach was actually ripe for like a really good place for an example of trying to do something like this. So while we're just talking about that.
I think that's an idea.
The only thing I mean, the vacancy taxes are being tried in a lot of different places, but it doesn't really solve our problem of not having middle income housing here or workforce housing.
Yeah, it probably doesn't.
It give us money, but
Yeah.
that's it. It would just
Yeah, it's-
raise money.
That money, you could
Yeah,
actually do
Go
something.
into affordable housing. An
Yeah.
Affordable housing fund.
it's a way of raising money, I guess. That's,
We've been building an affordable housing fund since the Sea Lark Apartments, and we just haven't figured out how to use funds.
Yeah, it's not a huge amount right now.
Well, and I think Marcy brought up a really important point, which is the goal here is housing production, right? To be able to build more housing that meets the needs of the community, to create more supply. And so I do actually think that there is merit in having a conversation about the suite of financial tools, whether it be a tax added or a fee collected or tax abatement or using your fund to fund production. There is kind of a suite of questions around what are the right financial tools. But I think Marcy is also pointing out that really, if you're thinking about production, looking at suitable lots, making the code easier, looking at whether parking is a barrier to those smaller scale projects that might fit in the community. There's kind of a regulatory and code bucket in terms of what might facilitate production, as well as a financial bucket. And it seems that both topics are worth exploring further, but the goal is really to figure out how to get more supply, not just how to get more money that then would need to be deployed to create supply, although both things would be good.
and infrastructure to support that. I mean, that's a big deal too. The water and wastewater treatment, all those things. You add a lot of new houses and those things have to be, supported as well.
We have such limited geographic area. It's hard for me to imagine lots of housing.
Yeah.
So I'm actually more concerned that the people who come here and can afford to buy a piece of land are going to build a second home. Whether you get a tax abatement or not, that's the cachet of being here and that's the price of land. So how do we actually talk dollars and cents? How do you make a project happen here in Cannon Beach with the expense of it? How do you find a private individual who's actually interested in making a real affordable housing project happen? I'm just curious.
Well, it's a very good question. And I think that's how we have to focus, especially as you brought up, when we think of policy, those are our parameters. I mean, if you want to discuss urban growth, within the urban growth boundary, that's a discussion that can be had. There is property to the east of us that is developable, although it's expensive to develop.
It is very expensive, yeah.
The city has great tools, though. I mean, let's just postulate that we owned a 12-acre RV park. You have the ability to rezone that R3 and work with a NGO that, plots it out with some cluster housing or in some, apartments and some single family homes that are not going to be big because it's R3. And then deed restrict a certain number of them, maybe 40 of them or 50 of them, if there's 100 of them total, are deed restricted to some definition of workforce, I guess. The city can create those set of circumstances with its zoning by ownership of the land. They can then zone it and turn it over to a developer that has to execute on your zoning.
Or make all of it affordable. Why only
But then
100?
it won't have any value to the developer, unfortunately. You have to have a mix.
If we're serious about it, maybe that's where you look for the funding.
I think you have to have a mix if you're a for-profit developer, but if you're able to take advantage of state and federal subsidies, then you can build without debt.
Right.
The land has to be free. There has to be subsidy somewhere. But that's the challenge, I think. If you're doing a for-profit model, absolutely, the developer has to make so much money on the market rate units that it pays for the affordable units.
Right.
But if you're willing to make them all affordable, then you don't have to sacrifice that 60%.
But if you were doing something at 100 units, I mean, 40 or 50 of them being affordable, that would be a good stroke. That plus a few more ADUs might get us to where we need to be.
Yeah, I think if it was feasible to have 100, I think it's a 12-acre RV park. So
So
100 units.
R3, you can do 100.
Unlikely to have the profit with that level of density. Right, you're not gonna sell $1 million homes that are triplex.
No, but I mean, they might be $600,000 homes that,
Sure.
yeah.
You certainly have to run the numbers, but I think there's
Yeah.
another alternative. Using the USDA Section 502 programs, you can build ownership homes for individuals that earn 80% AMI and less. And the cost of construction just turns into a low interest rate mortgage for the homeowner.
And that would be the city continuing to own
City would
land.
continue to own the land, and the city would then be able to enforce affordability in perpetuity. Is each of those homes is sold to a qualifying individual also earning 80% or less.
Right, if a developer did it, what kind of, what's the term of providing affordable housing typically?
There can be deed restrictions, but most of those can be challenged after 20, 21 years. So
See, I think that to me, that makes the most sense. Using programs like that. If we were going to do anything in the RV park or a part of it, or even a small section of it, would be to take advantage of those programs and then people can actually own a home. They build not as much equity because they wouldn't own the land, but they build some equity in the home itself. And then they have a home, they own a home, and it's a workforce home. And we're taking advantage of all those programs and government money. I think that to me makes a lot of sense.
And the likelihood that there's going to be some Oregon money associated with that for infrastructure development. We may get our sewers paid for, we may get our water
Yeah,
paid for.
possible. I don't know.
new programs rolling out, even one in January, and it's more a forgivable bond to purchase the land, so it wouldn't necessarily apply. The city already owned the land, but we can expect, I think, more of those programs coming down the pike, and Alyssa can probably comment on some of those as well.
My only comment on any of the state resources coming out of either the current session or future legislatures is that it's a highly competitive landscape across the state. As you can imagine, we're not the only community in Oregon with this issue. Oregon faces this statewide. And what I've seen with the current funding programs is cities that demonstrate that they are basically doing everything they can to proactively change their codes, streamline their requirements, tend to be the most competitive for state funding. I'm watching the current session now where there is talk of $100 million for housing related infrastructure. And there's been, there are multiple jurisdictions submitting requests, but really I heard somebody in Salem say that cities that are punching above their weight class are the ones that are getting to the front of the line. So cities that have shown that they're willing to change their codes, cities that are donating their own land, cities that are putting in tax abatements, those are the ones that tend to go to the front of the line for state funding. And so while I think there are opportunities for us to put ourselves in the front of the line, I think local action is the way to convey to the state the commitment that makes a city seem like a good investment. So without the state alone will not save us without us taking a look at what we can do locally as well.
So what do we do now?
I'm wondering if any of you want to build an ADU on your property. I think most of you are homeowners.
I'm seriously considering it, Michelle. Thank you.
That'd be great. I have some major housing insecurity and I probably have about 6 months left. So, so I'd love to move
I
in.
can't put a time frame on the project.
It's real.
Over
It's
tonight.
I know probably I'm a pain in the ass to a lot of people and they'd probably be excited that I don't have a place to live pretty soon, but it's real. And I mean, I'm exactly a person I'm heavily involved in the community and I've I've been working for myself and others to try to figure this out. And we are under a time crunch. And I'd love to I'm just making it real, but a lot of people don't have the time to come to these meetings over and over again. And I make time for it, but I also work for myself. So it'd be great if people actually, there's only 1,500 people that own homes here, or residents, I guess. So if people could actually just start thinking about what it would look like to them if they had an ADU or something they could rent to somebody that has 2 or 3 jobs, that takes care of the lawn or whatnot. So while I'm joking, I'm also serious.
Well, and I have a duplex.
I knew that.
Which has helped me to live in this town, being not necessarily of the financial demographic that most of our current home buyers are. But I mean, in my situation, I've got income for life based on my property as a long-term rental. So, I mean, there's some incentive. But again, for our home buyer, I'm not sure. Maybe it does open it up to a different home buyer or home builder.
Well, it's certainly a possibility here.
Yeah.
If we could tailor rules and regulations to try and get things in that direction, I believe it's worth exploring.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the small things that we brought up at the last budget session was that the building official fund is money that you all actually don't control. It's under state control, and it's almost irrevocably committed to the building official. And we can operate the building official's office for 3 years without any additional revenue right now, given the fund. And so it could be an interesting idea to reduce or eliminate building permit fees, but shift that to an affordable housing. So maybe the building official fund burns down for a few years, but we build equity in the affordable housing fund. One way or another, we ought to think about that building official fund, because if we do say some big projects, it's going to grow by another $1 million and the money never comes back.
You're talking about the construction excise tax?
No, I'm talking about money that is paid to the city for building permits that goes into our building official fund, which I think now stands at about $500,000. And the only thing it can be used for is funding the building official's office. So there are a lot of cities, I guess, that actually charge the building official rent to somehow claw some of that back. But it's a leakage in the system, and it's one of the only reserve funds that you all don't control.
Well, you could look at it another way, Tim. A 2007 level downturn would completely, take out that money in a few years.
You'd have to operate for, but in 2006, that kind of level downturn also would mean there would be a downturn in permits. I guess that's what you're saying. Yeah.
That's at that point, a lot of communities started to go with hiring out building official services and just eliminated the position.
It's something we ought to think about, because big projects ahead that might grow that fund by another $1 million. There could be more creative.
I agree. I'm not disagreeing. I just wanted to offer a scenario that this town has gone through.
Yep. No doubt.
I'd just like to return to something that Michelle was saying. Something that struck me during the public testimony was the number of people we heard from who talked about how precarious
Yeah.
their housing was. It was moving and shocking, and I mean, but also not surprising because I hear this in every city where I'm working. But there's something about Cannon Beach, it seems like that could, the size of the community, the passionate involvement of people, that could kind of, it seems like it could really change the whole approach, where it's more about how you find a way to provide more housing supply, more diversity of housing is something that you do as part of your service to the community and to make the community more Cannon Beach-like. I'm probably not saying this very well. It seems like it's within the ethic of the Cannon Beach kind of way to figure out how to solve this problem together as a community effort that's going to make the community stronger and more livable and better.
Totally agree.
You know, having more supply of housing means you could have more commercial activities that are open, you know, to serve you, to serve the full-time residents all days of the week, you know, and or your library could be open more hours. I mean, it could totally, you could have a pharmacy potentially, so you to another place. You could actually house a pharmacist. I mean, it could really make, cities used to be much more this way, where you could fulfill all of your daily needs without having to get in a car.
Well, a small town, you mean? Small towns used to be that way.
I think of Cannon Beach as a, you know, I feel like it's a city, but it's a small city. Maybe you prefer the word town, but.
Certainly do.
Village. City.
Yeah.
Village, okay.
Yeah, we have a challenge with volunteers for nonprofits and a more vibrant, you know, volunteers for the fire district. Those are all things that, to me, they seem like they're on the decline because we're not really that kind of community.
And because
This
of
community
ages.
of second homes.
A lot of people, we have a lot of old people here. And that's.
Same.
It was very, I was very moved by listening to all the young people that want to be here, but can't here.
Yeah.
I was too, and quite frankly, that's why I sort of hate the idea of the focus group, because it just seems like another way to add a year to this. I mean, it seems like these solutions are in front of us. There's smart people in the room. Let's boil it down and do it.
If I could pile onto that, I like the idea of a focus group, but rather than making it just an exercise, let's start planning something and see which barriers we run into, and then use your expertise and use that to inform perhaps code revisions. So pick a project, go after it, see what the barriers are, as opposed to doing it as an academic exercise, right? Do it as an actual planning exercise, and we'll certainly learn something. We may actually even get something built, right? And in the meantime, we can be tweaking the code as needed. To make it easier for the next
To
one.
undertake that exercise.
Sure. I mean, I'd be happy to volunteer as long as it's a real potential project and not just, you know, a theoretical.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to slow things down for a focus group. I mean, we've got this code audit going. You know, I think these public benefit provisions that you've proposed need to be part of that. But it's also time to get this code rewrite done. And that's one small piece of the pie. It seems like we really need to hit this from several fronts and look at city-owned property and other ways we can incentivize things, but.
Yeah.
So I hope that group is not about slowing things down.
I think this group here is great. I mean, I'm serious. It's big and maybe a little unwieldy, but I think it's great. I think there's a lot of different points of views and a lot of creative thinking in this whole group here.
And the fact that the public testimony of those people, the young people that are working 2 and 3 jobs and having to take the bus back and forth to where they can really live. They're not gonna have the time or the energy to be on a focus group is a concern of
Right.
mine.
We can count on Michelle.
We already know their story. I mean,
I know, I don't.
with respect, we know their story.
And I don't want to sit around and talk about the fact that we need it. We all agree we need diversified housing supply in Cannon Beach, so.
And so to the extent they're taking buses, I need to circle back to the parking issue. So I personally own a building in the heart of downtown that could take a 12,000 square foot second floor tomorrow. So with that 12,000 feet, I could create 8 to 12 housing units, apartments, whether affordable, market, a mix, whatever. I can't do it with the current parking code. So eliminating that from my perspective immediately creates housing downtown that people could walk around and wouldn't have the need for parking. With the current code, I could put about 2,000 feet on the second story of my building, which just doesn't make any sense to do. So it'll remain a 1-story building until we can figure out this parking issue. So I just want to stress the importance that, at least from my perspective, changing the parking rules gets us housing immediately. And I would start building, as soon as we could obtain a permit, if we could get rid of the parking as it exists.
We fast track those parking changes.
I mean, Aaron makes a fantastic point, and the point I think was made to all of us when the pot shop that lasted a month was built.
Yeah.
None of us liked the look of all of that parking. And we've had testimony that there's a structure fire on Hemlock. It's probably going to spread. And those businesses would have to rebuild at half their size, and it would look like a strip mall. And it's within your power to eliminate that right now. I mean, just do this.
Old kite shop. It's like, okay, do we want, a nice structure that fits with the downtown area, or do we want another building with another parking lot next to it?
I mean, I'm just in Joni Mitchell's camp. We paved Paradise.
Yeah.
A parking lot. I don't want it.
It's interesting though, because the council just had a big meeting and talking about the parking issues and how and about the fact that how do we solve the parking issue for tourists, et cetera. So and then talking about, do we make more parking? Do we have paid parking? How do we solve that issue? Because in the summer, it's crazy. People are driving around and around. They can't park. They're parking in front of people's driveways, all those kinds of things. And so what you're talking about is less parking, and I understand it, but I'm just wondering,
It's a self-limiting factor too.
those two conversations, how do they exist in the same room unless you find something that is going to, take care of both problems?
But Lisa, why do we care about tourists driving around in circles when we can't have our plumbers and our teachers living here, a pharmacist living here? Shouldn't our focus just be on the people, building some housing for people to live in that could work here, rather than the tourists that come and drive in circles? Let them drive in circles.
Except that it's not that just, I'm not worrying about them. I'm talking about the quality of life for people who live here, who go downtown to get their mail or whatever they're going down, or go to the grocery store. And there is no place for them to park, and there's such a congestion on the street, and people are walking out in front of cars. I mean, I'm not sympathetic to people driving around in circles who are tourists, but it's a reality, and we have to figure out a bigger plan that includes that problem as well.
2 hours parking on Hemlock. I mean,
And without a 4-level parking structure somewhere downtown, we're going to have this problem.
No one wants that.
no one wants that.
Did
We
the
don't-
TSP propose a parking management,
Yes.
pursue parking management downtown?
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
less about how do we accommodate more parking and how will we control that parking downtown? I think that's why we've had the discussions about the time limited. That's why paid parking may have.
Family that goes to the beach and parks in front of the Scoop and walks to the beach doesn't do the town really a lot of good, but they're there all day.
But more short-term time limited parking, some of those things start to solve the
Mhm.
problem that you're talking about, where I'm always confused when people start saying, we need a parking garage. It's like, so we want to cram even more people in here when our parking is full. And it just seems to me that's kind of making a worse experience.
I agree with you.
Worse experience in town, worse experience on the beach.
Right.
So I say let them drive around or drive to the next town.
George Vedder said it years and years ago, we're self-limited when parking is full, town is full. So it's managing the moving vehicles the moving vehicles know there's nowhere to go. Let's move on to the next town or whatever, however that management system works out. So that they're not driving.
Or else-
And that's part of what our conversation was.
And-
How do we get people through town and when they see there's no parking, they can make the exit.
And invent parking spaces. I mean, people were parking along Highway 101. People were parking all the way down Hemlock in the S curves last summer, which is pretty darn dangerous, I mean, so people, if they don't have a place to park, they'll invent one. And the only way to stop that, of course, is heavier enforcement.
We're probably a little off track, aren't we?
Yeah.
Oh, if I'm driving around in circles though.
So
I think that, I'm sorry, I think that many of you know too that.
Michelle, just a second. We have a speaker in the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
sorry, Michelle.
So sorry.
If we're talking about residential, it's a very different parking issue than tourist parking. So it seems like you could make some kind of changes to the parking code related to residential and then deal with the tourist piece through permits or some other process. But I don't think that they have to be the same conversation.
But they're in the commercial zone, at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, Michelle, your turn.
Oh, I'm sure you all know that businesses pay for parking down here, right? And I pay $250 a year for a non-existent spot. So I come to I'm looking at everybody there, but I come downtown every day and try to find parking. Whatever, parking's a pain. It's a pain everywhere. I find it annoying, and I find it more annoying that I have to pay for parking, yet tourists don't. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing in the code that would be interesting to talk about, but it'd be really exciting if we did get rid of some of the parking restrictions. I'm bummed that I have to pay for parking. So, I mean, I don't know if all you know that businesses have to pay. So.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm kind of hearing we don't want to form a focus group, but work with this body that we have gathered here instead.
Yeah,
Is that-
and input from people in the
And
community.
input
Yeah.
from people from the community. Are we all in agreement with that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
meetings. Because these would be public meetings.
Can you deal with all of us, Marcy?
I might still ask that a smaller group help us kick off this design workshop. I'm hearing that this design exercise on specific sites would be a more action-oriented thing than just having more meetings talking. And I agree with that. I agree with that sentence.
What kind of a timeline are you looking at for? How soon would we have
In the next couple of months. I meet with you again in March on
March
Something.
27th.
27th.
And what we could plan to
Do is have a date and an agenda, I would like format that I could bring to you and explain to you how it's going to work and get your thoughts. It could be an opportunity for this whole group to provide feedback on that. And then we could then commence the workshop.
I'm wondering too, if you could, if you're interested in doing an extra group, that I've had a lot of people that can't come to all these meetings beg me to be part of this group. And I don't know, like, not necessarily a focus group, but people that are renting. I know that they want to be involved, but they can't come to all of these meetings all the time. And that would be really awesome to actually hear from, the younger generations. And they're constantly asking me, let me know.
What do
So-
you, Michelle, what do you think if the design, this multiple day design workshop had open house slots built into the day? So daytime and an evening time option where people could drop in and participate in talking about the designs as they're progressing? Would
Yeah.
that fulfill?
Yeah, as long as there's people feel heard and there's availability, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure I know that it's just, I've heard from a lot of people because I've been very active in this. So I clearly have become the person to go to. So
My picture of this workshop is that there are people working on the designs, and there's some work ahead of time, obviously, to determine what the prototype sites are and what the prototype designs are, what all the zoning code and affordability objectives are, et cetera. And then there's working going on, but there's also public meetings built into this. Picture it being 2 to 3 days.
My only challenge with that, as much as I love public meetings, is our constraints are pretty limited in what we're allowed to build with different funding sources. And I'm worried that we'll hear a lot of wonderful ideas from the community that we just won't be able to accommodate with the funding streams, at least that our group has identified. So I'm just a little concerned about building that expectation. What kind of 2-bedroom apartment do you want to rent? Oh, sorry, you earn above 60% AMI, so we can't pay for a rental.
What do you think of this? Sometimes we'll precede the opening event. Say, if we start on a day, this is a very typical charrette format. Day 1, community members gather for a site tour together, and everybody can walk and talk, and then we can see some selected places. Then in the evening, there's a presentation that helps set the ground, kind of like the foundation of this is the reality. This is what we're going to be working with. We can vision on top of this, but this is the reality. The next few days, you'll see designs based on this reality. So we're not just entertaining every possible, dream, but we're starting with something that everybody understands.
Yeah, I like a lot of pieces of that. And I guess I might just flip it a little bit and say, here's a proposed project, present that up front. Would you like to live here? Why or why not? If you'd like to live here, get on our waiting list, because we'll need at least 3 people on the list for every home we build, right? Based on the HUD requirements and the USDA requirements. Right, because some people's plans change, they move out of the area, right? So we don't want to start a project without a good group of people interested. And then if they say they don't want to live there, we'll learn a lot about what's wrong with that project and what we could then tee up maybe next time for a different model, right? That they might be interested in. So it's a little more closed option, I totally will acknowledge, but it also fits within the funding schemes that we've identified, and maybe can be much more focused. Maybe we have a list, we have a waiting list at the end of the day, or we don't, and we know we completely missed the mark, right? And we need to redesign and look at a different option.
What do you think about that being one of maybe 2 or 3 different projects that we look at, where this one that you're describing is a project that's taking advantage of affordable housing
ownership models, yeah.
Tools, funds, but the other 2 are just looking at zoning code changes. What would happen if what would a duplex, how possible could a duplex be in certain neighborhoods on certain types of sites? What would the form shape be, and what would it mean for trees and parking? So those are more generic tests, but very prototypical neighborhood specific. And then one of them is actually looking at a real affordable funded model.
Sure. I don't want to speak for everyone because I want to hear from everyone else. My concern with the duplex charrette is that I think you need the neighbors, right? You need to actually identify almost a site, right? And you need those neighbors to be able to comment, the same ones who might appeal. You need potential owners who would want, or renters who would want to live there. And I think if you can identify that, that's great, but I almost feel like that's also, you sort of started a project and you've maybe, started to think about permitting and seeing then what kind of feedback you're gonna get. But I'm curious to hear what other people say, because that's not something I've thought, the code piece is not something I've thought as much about.
There are places in Cannon Beach that will allow a duplex outright. It's limited. Even places that will allow a triplex.
I think all of the R2 zone, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's not limited. It's more than anything else.
I'm going to speak about something I don't know exactly. Perhaps Steve can help me. Is that if there are already a certain number of duplexes in a neighborhood, there may be some limitations there.
I don't believe there's anything.
I'm not aware of
No,
the
no,
limitation.
no, it's that.
Sorry, I brought it up.
Right.
I mean,
Duplexes still have to go to DRB though. That's one thing that they do have to go to. So I mean, a lot of the things that I would say on a lot of the code revision and things like that that have been at Plan Commission and the discussion that I've had at council has been, we want less stuff determined by staff and more stuff determined by our committees. So that's the direction that we're going. And what we're talking about this evening is the exact opposite.
That's correct.
So I think those are the things that the Plan Commission, DRB, and council have to seriously consider when we're talking about all these things, because we're saying, hey, all these things are great and these are what we want to do. Yet we're doing the exact opposite because we're going to make it go through all these committees before it has the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that you all have to think of very seriously when you're doing these updates.
Right.
Thank you for bringing that point up.
And I think one of the reasons for that, Steve, is because things happen like the Purple House or trees being cut down that shouldn't be cut down, or people finding ways to wiggle around the rules. And it's been permitted. And that's why a lot of people don't want to see the commissions and the taken out of the review process.
I understand that, and I got no issue with that. I don't care. I don't mean I don't care. I don't have a problem which way we decide as a community what direction we have to go. I'm going to do it regardless which way. But those are the things that we're talking about that I think everyone says, yes, conceptually, this sounds good. But we have to think about, well, is it good because of the things you just mentioned? And do we want to do it?
But
I mean, that's the back and forth that has to happen.
right, but if we had a code that forbid the Purple House to begin with, so we wouldn't have to worry about stuff like that. In other words, if,
Go that detailed that we're gonna.
yes, well, but I'm saying, I don't know. Well, I'm not purple plastic, okay? But, I'm just saying is if you have a code that is set up so that you don't have,
design review for single family residential, I think that's illegal.
no, I didn't say that. I said,
The Purple House is a single family residence.
saying that written into your code, you have parameters so that something
Color
like
palette,
can happen.
the color palette for Cannon Beach, you can
It's,
choose any of these beiges or.
well, or you have to have cedar shakes or whatever. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways that communities do it. That they regulate what a place looks like. We do it for commercial places all the time. And so that is another approach. If you have that approach, then you don't need as much review by commissions because you've got it written into your code. I mean, we right now don't have it written in, so we have a lot of places where we can review things. Nothing that we could review would have stopped the Purple House at this point, no.
I wrote a piece that I didn't publish about the Purple House.
I'd love to see it.
I'll send it to you. It's fully formed. You'll have it tonight. In the concept of this is an arts community, I'm going to give Dave the license and say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm not here to tell him that that's wrong. I wouldn't do it, but for my house, but it's, I would hate the idea.
let's get back to.
Yeah, back to something we can actually do something about.
Isn't that when you talk about a form-based code, is that what you're talking about, is having a stricter, more, having the code laid out in a way so that you know ahead of time exactly what can happen and what can happen. And then you don't need as much oversight because it's written into the code.
That is what we've talked about.
Right.
I think that's possible.
That's one possibility. And the other end of that is having more oversight by boards and commissions of what is built. So.
Do you remember when we had the village character discussion?
Oh, yeah.
And we used the existing facade standards that had like, one dormer, I can't remember what they all are, but we looked at all of the provisions of your code that are clear and objective. And they do need to be, they could be much, much more, they could be more specific. They could be more numerous without being more of a burden. I think there's a balance that could be achieved where you would have more predictability. But you'd use a similar system to what you have today, just building more onto it, more predictability. And it's a preset, a look that you're going to get. I mean, that's something that some communities don't really want. But then some cities have a preset look they build into their code using a form-based kind of technique. And then they allow, if somebody does want to build the purple house and they're willing to go through design review to do it, they still can do it. That's always an option.
Yeah, I'm concerned about going too far on that. In that presentation you made, you had a picture of my house as there's a wide variety of houses in Cannon Beach.
That's true.
I hope I didn't offend you by having your house in my pictures. Was that the mosaic of all the houses? Yeah, there's a wide variety. I find them to fit for the most part. What we talked about was houses that where the garage is the most prominent feature, don't necessarily fit, but that's not an issue of architectural features. That's something else. Then that can also be better designed if it's appropriate for that neighborhood character. Yes, I'm hearing that a workshop of some sort would be useful. And maybe between now and the next time I meet with you, we can develop a plan for such a workshop. Does that sound like the way I should move forward?
No, I would love to see if you could present different examples of different ways of doing, different ways of doing what the results are or could be of different ways of setting up your code. In other words, like, again, I think you did this somewhat, but we didn't go into it very deeply about what a form-based code produces, how it would work, what all these different options would look like. Examples, like, I know I asked for an example a long time ago of a city this size using a form-based code, and I never got it. Somebody mentioned a city, someone or a town in the audience, and I looked it up, and it was a town that no house is under $1 million. So that's not, that's not going to work. That's not what we're trying to achieve.
I think I shared with you the form-based code handbook that I wrote for the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, which is goes into great detail about how form-based codes work. It gives lots of examples from different form-based codes for a wide variety of cities from all over the United States, because it is easy to think that if you see the form-based code for, I can't remember, it's a southern town that we were given, not by me, and it does make you think that, oh, we're going to get this southern town look if we do a form-based code. That's not what we're trying to communicate. So the form-based code handbook had all these different examples of how form-based codes are applied.
I remember that.
Difference. Some, for cities that didn't care as much about architectural style, they cared more about the form and the location of the car. Some were very, very specific. There's a spectrum. And the goal with providing that handbook was to show you that it's an approach that can be customized to the location.
Right, but I didn't see one in there that applied to a city or a town of this size. I didn't. Every single town in there was way bigger than we are, including the town with the antebellum section. That's the southern one. So that's what I'd like to see, is how that would apply to a town of this size that's so built out already.
Why don't we just show you what it would look like if it applied here? Why don't we just,
Right.
that would be an outcome of the workshop, in my view.
Okay, I'd be very curious to see that.
Approach could apply here.
Yeah, it'd be great.
So between now and March, the March meeting, would you have a small group of people work on the approach to the workshop?
Yes.
Okay, how many and what?
Well, I would like to work with you.
Sure. Be happy to.
I'd like to work with.
Gonna nominate Brandon while he was out of the room.
Yeah.
So I would like to nominate him while he's in the room.
I do need to ask, what type of time commitment are you looking?
I think it's a couple of Zoom calls where I show you a format, talk to you about the different ways of doing this.
Before the meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
For the 22nd. So.
And we,
More than happy to do something like that.
and we have 1 week in
Brandon, we have Mike, we have you.
I think Michelle is important
Yes.
for that conversation.
And I was also wondering if I could invite the man who is sitting behind me, who's the manager of the affordable apartment building.
was he?
That's
not
Craig.
sitting with-
Craig, yeah.
That's Craig. He's actually been texting me this entire time. I'd also like to have Eric. He knows the codes pretty well. Since we're talking about people we like.
Is that, okay, so. Craig,
But make sure we don't, so you two are planning, okay. And Michelle's design review. Craig would be a citizen for it. Michelle is design review and the younger crowd.
I'm not younger. I'd also
Than
like
me.
to throw out,
Well, I'm going to push myself into this because I'd like to be part of it too, because I have a different perspective.
And that's fine, because we'd still just have two
Right.
city council people.
I'd like to also throw in, I know Amber's not here, but Amber who's on, oh God, what's the other committee?
We're not going to throw in people.
Public Works.
What? Yeah, Public Works, thank you, gosh.
No, I don't think
But
that's.
she's been asking me about it
Well,
also.
she's not here at the meeting. I don't.
No, I think we're.
Well,
gonna
we didn't
talk
know we were
about-
nominating people for a committee at this meeting either, so.
We,
It's
Or
not-
committee, whatever.
this is the workshop planning, just to.
yeah, it's just a one-time, it's not a permanent committee at all.
So I can just email you, Marcy, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Tim, any interest?
I'm gonna say no, thank you.
Okay. We don't want anybody to feel left out.
It seems like a
Yeah.
robust group.
Yeah. Thank you, Chet, for,
Yeah, I don't think it should get any bigger.
right, because you won't get a lot accomplished. Okay, so that's gonna be our direction. And we'll have some staff involved. Steve, Robert? Little enthusiasm? Just a little. Okay. Anything else want to talk about with item number 1? So I thank you all for the discussion. I know this is an important part of the future of our town. And thank you. And so Planning Commission and Design Review and our guests are excused.
We have a little,
And
minute.
City Council can have a little break.
Not everybody.
Concrete. We're ready to. Okay, we're going to be continuing our work session for this evening. Second item is the format for the Cannon Beach citizen questions. The purpose of our discussion tonight is just to determine how we're going to format the responses for the March 19th meeting. Okay, we're not talking about the individual questions that have been submitted, just how we're going to format our response.
Well, okay, so first, let me just try and get this straight. So first, Emmerich and CETA are going to address some of the questions in writing.
They're going to address the questions that are directly construction related.
In writing.
Yes.
And will that be distributed as part of the packet so everybody can see it, or?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, and will it be distributed ahead of the meeting?
Yes.
People can read through it who've asked the questions and see what the answers are. And then we come into the open meeting. And
You're getting too far ahead for me because I still don't know what the questions are. I mean, I've seen a few communications and
It's my thought that the purpose of having another meeting was to talk about ways that the citizens were coming up with to reduce the scope and cost of the Cannon Beach Elementary. We have received 2 identified letters, one from Sam and one from Paul Duber, and those would be, in my mind, those would be the questions that we are going to look at.
and Emmerich is, and CETA are going to look at. And then we all come together, and then how do you see, I don't want it to be, they talk, people in the audience say things, and then we sit here stony, and then we say stuff and they don't get to respond. So is there a way to make it so it's a back and forth?
I don't see how we need a back and forth. We have the questions. We're going to have the answers. We're just going to go over the answers.
But have it so that there is some dialogue.
Yeah, are we gonna, we're gonna have public
We
comment,
have public comment. Yeah, I think we have to.
but I mean, comment about the questions
Right.
themselves.
That's what I'd like to see.
Well, that's what we're going to that's what we're discussing
Okay,
today.
yeah.
Okay.
I think we should, I mean,
Too.
clearly here.
Yeah, just get it up right out there. So if the question is, would it be, let's just for an example, would it be how much money would be saved by having 1 bathroom?
Okay.
That's a question.
That was what the
They can answer that question. But then there needs to be some has to be some back and forth about that. For example, if you have 1 bathroom with 3 stalls and you have women waiting for a half an hour to use the bathroom, that kind of thing. There has to
So are you saying that the counselors would respond to that, or the public?
both.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is too, the architects are gonna be here, aren't they?
Yes.
Right.
So they're the contractors are the ones actually gonna have to respond to the cost situation. If there is a question about actual
Can't answer that.
architectural question about cost, they need to
Right.
wants to answer
But
that.
they're going to have those, excuse me, the answers already prepared. Because that's
Mhm.
one of the questions,
Right.
one of the theories is how much could we save if we had 1 bathroom? Or
And
a
then-
bathroom in a different.
But then
location.
if we like that idea, we have to explain why. If we don't like it, we have to explain why.
Mhm.
So there's some reasoning, because you could do it either way. And there might be a really good reason why you don't want to do it that way, or you do want to do it that way as a council.
Right.
That we owe an explanation of why we've chosen to go one way rather than another.
Okay, Bruce?
And also, it'll be very difficult. And as a matter of fact, I think it'll be impossible to give a definitive answer. Because right now there's a design with restrooms in 2 different locations. If the question is, how much would it cost to have 1 restroom? It's like, well, where are we talking about putting it? Do we, the middle zone is the lobby, or is it part of the classroom or whatever? Because there's all these other decisions have to be made. So it's possible to say, for example, that if you take 1 of the restrooms out, you can talk about how much money would be saved. If it's talking about a new design element, which doesn't currently exist, that's going to be harder for them to give you an answer.
Right. But like taking out, one of the big things is taking out the windows in the Quonset hut on the,
Quantifiable.
on the, yeah. And making the opening in the lobby, which is set back, you know, so I mean, there's all, it just, I think I would feel if I was a person who'd submitted these questions, that I would want to know what the thinking, what our reasoning was for choosing one or the other. In other words, do we think it's worth $5,000 to have another bathroom or whatever, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. And, you know, you would, and so there's, in other words, so we're not just making these decisions in a box, we're responding to what Emmerich and the design people are telling us, saying, well, it's true, we would save $50,000 by having only one bathroom and, you know, knocking out one of the bathrooms, but here's why we think it's a good idea or a bad idea. So there's a rationale behind whatever decisions we end up making.
A lot of the rationales are gonna have to come from council.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right, and the one that we're talking about, the one restroom versus two, is we wanted to be able to go ahead and have discrete parts of the building open.
Right, we know that.
Open up everything,
Yeah.
including the gym, for example, if you're having a class somewhere.
There's other reasons too.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, but I think it's important in order for it to not be just a futile exercise on the part of those people asking questions, that they get a response, a rationale for whatever choices that we end up making. Why?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that CETA and Emmerich will be able to give you cost information. They will be able to give you the history on why that decision was made. But then it's going to fall to the council to say that, well, we still feel the same way, or no, that's changed my mind, that sort of thing. Because ultimately the answers that are being requested will come from council, not the architect and the
Right.
I'm still
CMGC, but we will provide support.
Okay.
When can we see the questions?
You have,
We already have them. These are the questions they're showing you.
Okay,
the questions came, I think one set,
Tuesday.
yeah.
Yeah. Did you see the emails that were sent?
yes.
And you're saying they don't seem like questions to you?
Well, some of them really aren't. They're long.
Some of them are
long
very
paragraphs.
rhetorical kind
Yeah.
of things, you're right.
That was my word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rhetorical.
Yeah.
But there's still, you can find a question in there if you try. Yeah.
So that email that's tentative questions are the questions.
The
So
paragraphs.
not the former mayor's
No,
letter.
Not the first 9 pages, but then there was a list at the end of his 9 pages or whatever it was that had something that could be construed as questions or, you know.
I see 13 questions
Yeah.
here.
Okay, the 13 questions, that might have been the one that came initially. And the reason we ended up with the second documents was that the 13 questions, there were none that were responsive to Paul's letter. And so he went back and got some additional information. So
And he got that information from Sam, right?
I believe he did.
That was Sam's letter.
Yeah, I'm still sorry, but
Do you want me to forward it to you?
I've got printouts.
did you send it?
Yeah.
I mean, I've got my email right here.
Okay.
Oh, amended. I think I see it. No, that's not it.
Wasn't
The one next, right, B.
She's sending it right now. Yeah.
Format. Okay.
It was I was disappointed that it wasn't, you know, that there weren't more more questions actually that were really substantive and, you know, and the format was not really what I had expected, but that's fine. I'm not the one asking them, so.
Okay,
Are you seeing them now?
I got it now.
Okay. Brandon, do you have any?
I'm okay with what you guys have discussed.
Okay. Thank you.
So the questions that are going to be asked, are they a combination of the questions, the 13 questions, and then some of Sam's questions?
I don't think those 13 questions are
They're not.
included at all.
They're not what we asked for.
Right,
Yeah, and they're also not identified by any person.
right. So are we taking the questions then from what Sam wrote?
And Paul,
And Paul?
yes.
I don't know if I saw.
Paul's,
Okay, well, there's Sam's
There were two attachments.
several pages.
Yeah,
This is
And 2
Paul's.
pages of Paul, from Paul.
2 pages.
I see Paul. No, I didn't. I didn't see that.
Forwarded it to Nancy too.
Yeah.
We're gonna be on the same page here pretty quick.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah, it was.
and the ones that have something that can be quantified will be addressed by either CETA and or Remick.
I see it. Okay, good.
Remick,
What's that?
By our contractor.
yeah, Remick is the CMGC for Cannon Beach. Emmerich is the other two.
Okay.
I see, okay.
Okay, we're all okay with that?
Jennifer, when did you say the audit meeting was? Is that March 27th?
Yes.
Okay, that was one of our possible council meeting. Okay,
All of your possible council meetings have been used.
okay.
In March.
And
It did seem like there was many days.
there was only, I think, 3 extra days.
Okay, is there anything for good of the order?
One thing I would just ask, on the drawings, I know that, you know, architects have a way of putting in figures and stuff, but I just would love it to just be stated on how tall those buildings, because when you know, there was a couple comments about how it looked like so grand and, you know, that looked too grand for Cannon Beach. But if you look at how high they really are and look at what the footage is, it isn't so grand. It's just the way architects draw things, you know, to look, just like when you buy an apartment, you know, and they show you the apartment online and it looks gigantic and you walk into it and it's like 600 square feet. Yeah. You know, that, I mean, I'm not saying that this building's going to be a closet, but it's not, it's not as grand when you see it, you know, not looking up from below at night with lit sky and.
Perspective. They have
Yeah.
a person, maybe 5 feet, 5'6" or something like that. And the building being, you know, 50 feet away from them and they're standing, what would it look like? But there's a lot of different ways to go ahead. and
Right.
look at it.
But you want to, you know, to make it look as beautiful as possible, sometimes they grander than it is what I'm saying. If you look at how many feet tall it is, then you realize it's not, you know, just like when people said the city hall was so huge, it's 1 story high, most of it, you know, I mean.
Is
But
this
we-
related to a question?
Hmm?
Is this related to a question?
No.
Or just
But
a
it's
general
related to
concern?
that was a very general concern about grandeur, which
Okay,
I'm just not seeing.
Yeah, we've actually, we've had that discussion too about the drawings being
Right,
so glamorous.
yeah.
Yeah.
okay, back to good of the order. Anybody have anything? Okay, thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
Thanks.
Thanks.